So it's 2008, Orlando, Florida. A woman named Cindy Anthony calls 911 and she's frantic. But here's the thing. She's not calling because her granddaughter is missing. She's calling because her daughter Casey stole her car and it smells like there's been a dead body in it. Just let that sink in for a second. The dispatcher asks the obvious question, "Where's your granddaughter?" And Cindy suddenly realizes, wait, yeah? Where is Kaylee? She hasn't seen her in 31 days. 31 days. Her 2-year-old granddaughter has been gone for over a month, and she's just now putting this together. When Casey finally gets on the phone, she tells the operator that a nanny took Kaylee. The nanny's name is Zenaida Fernandez Gonzalez, or Zanny for short. She's had Kaylee for 31 days. The dispatcher asks where the nanny is. Casey doesn't know. She asks for a phone number. Casey doesn't have one. An address? Nope. Now you're probably thinking, okay, maybe she's in shock, maybe she's been searching on her own, maybe there's some explanation. But when the cops show up and start asking questions, Casey takes them to an apartment complex where she says the nanny lived. They go to the apartment. Want to guess who lives there? Nobody. It's been vacant for months. Then she tells them she works at Universal Studios. So they drive to Universal. They're walking through the park, and Casey's leading them to her office, confident as anything. They walk and keep walking until finally she stops in the middle of a hallway and goes, "Okay, I don't actually work here." The detectives are standing there like, "I'm sorry, what?" She used to work there, years ago, and just hasn't worked there in forever. Every single thing she's telling them is falling apart in real time. The nanny doesn't exist. The job, fake. The phone numbers she gave for Kaylee's father and her co-workers, all disconnected or wrong numbers. And here's what's driving me insane about this. While all of this is happening, while her daughter is supposedly kidnapped by a fictional nanny, Casey is out partying. We're talking about drinking competitions at bars, entering hot body contests, getting a tattoo that says Bella Vita, beautiful life. There are photos of her at clubs, looking absolutely carefree. Her friends later say she never once mentioned that Kaylee was missing. Not once. When her mom, Cindy, first reported that car smelled like death, she wasn't being dramatic. Casey had abandoned her car in a parking lot, and when it got towed, the tow yard guy opened the trunk, and the smell was so bad he thought there was definitely a dead body in there. He'd smelled that smell before. George Anthony, Casey's dad, used to be a cop. He picks up the car, opens the trunk, and later testifies that he knew that smell too. But what's in the trunk? Nobody. Just Casey's work clothes, some trash, and a bag of garbage. Except the smell won't go away. Cadaver dogs? They hit on the trunk. Multiple dogs, multiple handlers, all of them signaled that there was human decomposition in that car. Now the police are tearing Casey's life apart, trying to find Kaylee. And I mean everything is falling apart. The imaginary nanny worked at an imaginary place, had imaginary friends, lived in an imaginary apartment. Casey's created this entire elaborate fake life, right? And none of it, absolutely none of it, is real. And get this, Casey's creating more lies while she's in custody. She tells police that Kaylee's father died in a car crash. They investigate. He's alive. She says she left Kaylee at the Sawgrass Apartments. They check the guest logs, security footage, everything. Casey was never there. She gives them names of co-workers who can verify her story. Those people either don't exist or barely know who she is. The detectives are sitting across from her watching her spin these elaborate stories, And you can see it in the interrogation footage. They're genuinely baffled. One detective asks her point blank, "Casey, do you understand how serious this is?" And she just keeps lying, calmly, confidently, like she genuinely believes her own stories or doesn't care that they're falling apart. While her brother Lee gets involved, trying to talk sense into her. He's begging her to tell the truth, to help them find Kaylee. And Casey just sits there with this blank expression, spinning more stories. She tells Lee that she's been doing her own investigation, that she's getting close to finding Kaylee, that she has leads. Lee asks what leads. She can't say. It's all very secretive. None of it is real. Meanwhile, Cindy and George are on TV doing interviews, pleading for Kaylee's safe return. They're setting up search parties, printing flyers, doing everything you'd expect grieving grandparents to do. And Casey? She's upset that the media attention isn't about her. There are jailhouse letters where she complains that everyone's talking about Kaylee, and nobody's asking how she's doing. The narcissism is just... it's breathtaking. But here's where it gets worse. They start searching near the Anthony home, and in December 2008, a meter reader named Roy Kronk finds a small skull in a wooded area, literally 15 houses down from where Casey grew up. It's less than a half-mile away. The remains are in a laundry bag, inside a trash bag, with duct tape. The medical examiner can't determine the cause of death because the body's too decomposed, but that duct tape? It's placed across where the mouth and nose would have been. Now here's something that really bothers me about that discovery. Roy Kronk, the meter reader, actually called police about that area 3 times in August, months before he found the remains. He said something looked suspicious, that there was a bag that looked out of place. Police came out, searched around, didn't find anything. So either the body wasn't there yet in August, which means someone moved it later, or the police just completely missed a dead child in the woods. Neither option is good. The defense later tries to suggest that Roy Kronk moved the body or tampered with evidence because he wanted the reward money. But that theory falls apart pretty quickly because the bag was weathered. There were roots growing through it. Everything suggested it had been there for months. But the fact that police searched that area and didn't find anything, that's going to become important later. So now we've got a dead toddler, a mother who lied about everything, a car that smelled like death, and Casey's out getting tattoos about the beautiful life. The prosecution's theory is straightforward. Casey killed Kaylee, probably with chloroform, put duct tape over her face, stored the body in her trunk for a few days, and then dumped her daughter like garbage in the woods while she went out partying. They charge her with first-degree murder. The whole country is watching this case. Everyone's convinced she's guilty. I mean, the evidence seems pretty damning, right? Nancy Grace is on TV every single night, basically conducting a trial by the media. The prosecution is confident. This should be an easy conviction. But then the trial happens, and this is where everything goes completely sideways. Casey's defense attorney, Jose Baez, stands up in opening statements and drops a bomb that nobody saw coming. He says, "Okay, ready for this? Kaylee wasn't murdered. She drowned in the family pool. And Casey's father, George, found the body. And because he's an ex-cop, he knew how to stage it to look like a murder. Oh, and he covered it up. And Casey went along with it because George had been sexually abusing her since she was 8 years old. So she was psychologically conditioned to do whatever he said, and to lie about everything." The courtroom absolutely loses its mind. George is on the stand later, crying, vehemently denying everything. There's no evidence of abuse, no medical records, no witnesses, no prior reports, nothing. Casey never told anyone about abuse before this trial. Not her friends, not her brother, not her mother. Nobody. But Baez has now planted this seed of doubt, and he's hammering it home. If George covered up an accidental drowning, that explains Casey's bizarre behavior, right? That explains all the lies? And look, I'm not saying George did anything. The guy lost his granddaughter, and then got publicly accused of being a child molester and a murderer in front of the entire world. His life was destroyed. But Baez is brilliant at this. You have to give him that. He knows he doesn't have to prove George did it. He just has to make the jury think. Maybe? Maybe there's a possibility? And that's reasonable doubt right there. The prosecution brings in their evidence, and there's a lot of it. Computer searches on Casey's laptop for chloroform and how to make chloroform. The original software said it was searched 84 times. There are searches for neck breaking, household weapons, shovel, and even how to make weapons out of household products. This is on the family computer, and the searches happen during times when only Casey is home. But then, the defense brings in their own computer expert who says the software that counted those chloroform searches was wrong. It wasn't 84 times. It was once, one single search, and it could have been a pop-up ad, could have been an accidental click, could have been anything. The prosecution's expert admits that, yeah, the software had an error. So suddenly, this key piece of evidence is compromised. They bring in the cadaver dogs and their handlers. Two different dogs both indicated human decomposition in Casey's trunk. But the defense brings in experts who say cadaver dogs aren't 100% reliable. Sometimes they hit on rotting food, sometimes on cleaning products, sometimes on animal remains. Yes, these dogs are trained and certified, but they're not infallible. Reasonable doubt. The prosecution presents the duct tape. So it's the same brand as tape found in the Anthony garage. The defense argues there's no DNA on it, no fingerprints, nothing tying it to Casey specifically. Could have been placed there by someone else. Could have been George. Could have been Roy Kronk. Could have been anyone. The duct tape is weathered and compromised. Reasonable doubt. They bring in air sample experts who testify that they analyzed the air in the trunk and found chemical compounds consistent with human decomposition. This is relatively new science, air analysis. The defense brings in their own experts who say this science isn't established enough, that it hasn't been peer-reviewed sufficiently, that you can't definitively say those compounds only come from human decomposition. Could be garbage. Could be anything organic breaking down in a hot trunk in Florida. Reasonable doubt. The prosecution presents Casey's behavior. The partying, the tattoo, the lying, the complete lack of concern for her missing daughter. Any normal mother would be frantic, right? But Baez argues that Casey's not normal because she's been abused her whole life. She's psychologically damaged. Her coping mechanism is to lie and pretend everything's fine, because that's what she was conditioned to do by George. It's not evidence of murder. It's evidence of trauma. They show the jury Casey's jailhouse letters where she barely mentions Kaylee and mostly complains about the food and the other inmates and how hard this is for her. The defense spins it as she's in denial, she's traumatized, she can't face what happened. Not evidence of guilt. The prosecution brings in testimony about Casey's diary entry written around the time Kaylee died. It says, "I have no regrets, just a bit worried. I just want everything to work out okay. I completely trust my own judgment and know that I made the right decision. I just hope that the end justifies the means." Pretty damning, right? But the defense establishes that the entry was written in 2003, years before Kaylee died. It's about a boyfriend. It's completely unrelated. The prosecution's timeline was wrong. Every single piece of evidence the prosecution brings, Baez finds a way to poke holes in it. Not necessarily to disprove it, just to make it seem less certain. And in a criminal trial, the burden of proof is beyond a reasonable doubt. Baez doesn't have to prove Casey's innocence. He just has to make the jury doubt the prosecution's case. And it works. The jury deliberates for less than 11 hours. Think about that. Not a trial that lasted 6 weeks. Testimony from dozens of witnesses, hundreds of pieces of evidence, and they're done in less than half a day. That should have been the first sign that something was off. On July 5, 2011, they came back with a verdict. Not guilty of first-degree murder. Not guilty of aggravated manslaughter. Not guilty of aggravated child abuse. Guilty only of 4 misdemeanor counts of lying to law enforcement. The courtroom erupts. People are crying, screaming. Outside the courthouse, there are crowds of protesters holding signs, absolutely losing their minds. The whole country is in shock. How did this happen? One juror later says they all believed Casey was probably involved in Kaylee's death somehow, but they couldn't figure out how she died, and without knowing how she died, they couldn't prove murder beyond a reasonable doubt. They made themselves sick over it, but legally, they felt they couldn't be convicted. Another juror says they wanted to see more evidence. They wanted the prosecution to connect all the dots definitively, and there were just too many gaps. The prosecution's case was circumstantial. Strong circumstantial evidence, but still circumstantial. Casey walks out of jail after serving 3 years for the lying charges, and she immediately goes into hiding. Her legal team protects her, moves her around, keeps her out of the public eye because there are legitimate death threats. People want her dead. The public is absolutely convinced she murdered her daughter and got away with it. Meanwhile, Kaylee Anthony's cause of death is still officially listed as homicide by undetermined means. Nobody else has ever been charged. The nanny never existed. George was never charged with anything. The case is essentially closed with no real resolution. Casey does a few interviews over the years, and her story keeps changing. In one interview, she claims she still doesn't know how Kaylee died. She says she wasn't there when it happened. Maybe Kaylee drowned like the defense said, or maybe something else happened. But Casey genuinely doesn't know. She says she blacked out that day, that she has memory problems, that it's all a blur. But she also says her father was there. But also that she doesn't remember. But also that it was definitely an accident. Her story shifts depending on who's asking and when they're asking. She never gives a straight answer about what actually happened during those 31 days. In another interview, she suggests that maybe Kaylee is still alive somewhere. That maybe someone took her and the body in the woods wasn't actually Kaylee. The DNA evidence proved it was Kaylee, but Casey floats this theory anyway, like she's still living in her fantasy world of lies. George and Cindy Anthony's lives are destroyed. Their marriage nearly falls apart. George attempts suicide at one point. Cindy stands by Casey through everything, which tears the family apart even more. Lee distances himself from all of them. The whole family is fractured and broken. And here's what really gets me. We'll probably never know what actually happened. Casey's the only one who knows the truth, and she's never telling. And did she accidentally kill Kaylee and panic? Did she intentionally kill her because Kaylee was getting in the way of her party lifestyle? Did George actually cover up a drowning like the defense claimed? We don't know. What we do know is that a 2-year-old died, was thrown away in the woods like garbage, and her mother went out partying for a month while everyone looked for her. We know that Casey created an entire elaborate web of lies that fell apart under the slightest scrutiny. We know that she showed absolutely no normal maternal concern or grief. But we also know that the prosecution couldn't definitively prove their theory. They couldn't prove the cause of death. They couldn't definitively prove premeditation. They had a mountain of suspicious circumstances, but no smoking gun. And in the American justice system, that's not enough for a murder conviction. This case exposes something really uncomfortable about our justice system. Sometimes guilty people go free because we can't prove guilt beyond reasonable doubt. And yeah, that's how it's supposed to work. We'd rather let guilty people go free than convict innocent people. But when it's this obvious, when it's a dead child and a mother who's clearly lying about everything, it feels wrong. It feels like justice failed. The prosecution made mistakes too. They went for first-degree murder with the death penalty. If they'd charged manslaughter or second-degree murder, maybe the jury would have convicted. But they were so confident, so sure this was a premeditated murder that they overreached. And the jury couldn't get there. There's also the media circus aspect. This case was everywhere. Nancy Grace covered it obsessively. The trial was broadcast live. Everyone had an opinion. Did that affect the jury? They claim it didn't, but how could it not? The pressure to get it right, the knowledge that the whole world was watching, that had to weigh on them. Some people think the jury let Casey go because they were scared of convicting her and then finding out later she was innocent. But here's the thing. The evidence that she was involved in some way is overwhelming. Even if you don't think she premeditated murder, even if you think it was an accident, her behavior afterward is inexcusable. The lying, the partying, the disposing of the body. That's not the behavior of an innocent person. But inexcusable behavior isn't the same as proof of murder beyond reasonable doubt. And that's what the jury needed. So here we are. And over a decade later, and Caylee Anthony is still dead, Casey Anthony is free, and we still don't have real answers. Justice is supposed to bring closure, right? It's supposed to make sense, to give us resolution. But in this case makes no sense at all. A 2-year-old died, and someone knows exactly what happened, and they're never telling. That's what keeps me up at night about this case. Not just that a child died, but that the truth died with her, buried in those woods. And all we're left with is lies, speculation, and a system that couldn't figure out how to hold anyone accountable. That's the story of Caylee Anthony. And it's not a satisfying ending, because there is no ending. Just questions, frustration, and a little girl who deserved so much better than what she got.